I'm Dana Riverdale, 38, and I became a second parent to my baby brother the summer I turned 16. The same summer our father walked out for good. For more than 20 years, I held my family together quietly. I paid for the braces, the first car, the tuition, the roof over my mother's head, and I never said a word about any of it because I didn't want to be thanked. I wanted to be seen. Then one afternoon, on a flight line in front of my brother's entire squad, they laughed at me, and a man I had never met stood up and told them exactly who I was. Have you ever given everything to people who couldn't see you, only to be recognized by a total stranger? If so, tell me your story in the comments. You are not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever had to stand up for yourself after a lifetime of being overlooked, hit that like button and subscribe. The summer my father left, I was 16 years old, and my brother Jeremy was barely a year into the world. I remember the exact weight of him in my arms on the afternoon Raymond Riverdale walked out the front door of our house in eastern North Carolina and did not look back. My mother sat at the kitchen table with her hands flat on the wood, like she was holding the surface down so it would not float away. Nobody told me to pick the baby up. He was crying, and she was not moving. And so I crossed the linoleum and lifted him out of the bouncer and put him against my shoulder, and that was the moment, if I am honest, that I became something other than a child in that house. For the next 14 years, I would be a lot of things to Jeremy. I would be the one who learned to warm a bottle to the right temperature on the inside of my wrist. I would be the one who walked him to the bus stop in the gray light before my own classes, and the one who taught him to tie his shoes on the back step while my mother slept off a double shift. I would be a great many things. The one thing I would never quite manage to be in the eyes of my family was impressive. My mother worked herself down to the bone in those years, and I do not say that to shame her. She cleaned offices at night and rang up groceries during the day, and she kept the lights on, and she did it without a husband and without a word of self-pity. But somewhere in the grind, she settled on a story about her 2 children that was simpler than the truth. And the story was this: Jeremy was the baby, the soft one, the one who needed protecting. And I was the responsible one. In our house, being the responsible one did not mean you were admired. It meant you were the one who did not get to need anything, because you were busy being the reason everyone else could. I learned to live inside that story. When I made honor roll, the conversation at dinner was about whether Jeremy had eaten his vegetables. When I won a regional science fair, my mother thanked me for getting Jeremy to his pediatric appointment on the same afternoon. I am not telling you this so you will feel sorry for the girl I was. I am telling you so that you understand the shape of the thing, because the shape never changed. It only got bigger. In the spring of my senior year, I won a Marine Corps scholarship that would pay my way through college if I committed to serve afterward. I had not told anyone I applied. I had filled out the forms at the public library after Jeremy was asleep, and I had practiced the interview in the bathroom mirror with the fan running so no one would hear. When the letter came, I read it 3 times, standing at the mailbox before I let myself believe it. I brought it inside like it was made of glass. My mother read it, and the first thing out of her mouth was not congratulations. "You're really going to leave us to go play soldier?" she said. She set the letter down on the counter, face down, the way you put down a bill you cannot pay. Who's going to watch your brother? I was 18 years old, and I had just been handed the first door out of that house, and the only question anyone could think to ask was who would replace me. I remember looking at Jeremy, 5 years old, racing a toy truck along the baseboard and feeling something split quietly down the middle of me. Part of me wanted to put the letter back in the envelope and stay. The other part of me, the part that had been carrying a baby since I was 16, knew that if I did not walk through that door, I would spend the rest of my life as furniture in someone else's house. I went. I told myself I would still be there for Jeremy. I told myself that providing for him from a distance was its own kind of staying. And in the years that followed, I kept that promise so thoroughly that no one in my family ever had to notice I was keeping it. That was the trick of it. I had become so good at being the responsible one that my responsibility turned invisible. The lights stayed on, and nobody asked who was paying the bill. I lay awake a lot that last summer at home, listening to the house settle and to my brother breathing in the next room. I had already learned the lesson that would govern the next 20 years of my life, though I did not have the words for it yet. In our family, love was something you gave. It was not something that came back to you. You poured it into the people you were responsible for, and you did not stand around afterward waiting to be thanked, because the thanks were not coming, and the waiting only made you bitter. So I stopped waiting. I packed 2 duffel bags and a footlocker, and I kissed my brother on the top of his head while he slept. And I left for a life my family would spend the next 2 decades deciding was not real. They were wrong about that. But it would take a stranger on a flight line and a single word to make them understand how wrong. I did not know any of that yet. I only knew that I was leaving and that some part of me had been preparing to leave since the afternoon I was 16 and lifted a crying baby out of a bouncer because no one else would. I told myself I was not running. I told myself I was building something. It turned out both were true. What I built over the years that followed was a career. What I never managed to build, no matter how much I poured into it, was a place in my own family where I was seen. I would fly into combat before I ever cracked that particular code. And the strange, hard truth of my life is that the people I would risk everything to protect were, for a long time, the only people in the world who could not see me at all. The day they finally did was not the day I expected. It came in a place I almost did not drive to, in front of people I had never met, out of the mouth of a man I had never been introduced to. But I am getting ahead of myself. To understand why one word on a flight line could turn my whole family inside out, you have to understand how thoroughly they had decided I was nobody, and how long I let them. Most of my adult life, I let them. That was the cost of leaving. I just did not know yet that there was a way to stop paying it. There was a way. I found it. But first, the story has to get worse. By the time I earned my commission and pinned on my first set of gold bars, I had stopped expecting my mother to come to anything. The ceremony where I became a second lieutenant in the United States Marine Corps was attended by my roommate's family and a master sergeant who had taken a liking to me. My own mother sent a card. It arrived 4 days late. It said she was proud, and then it said that Jeremy had a cold, and I understood, reading it, exactly where I ranked. I framed the bars, anyway. I have them still. When I went off to flight school in Pensacola, I mailed home photographs. Me in a flight suit on the ramp, and me beside the aircraft I was learning to fly. I imagined them on the refrigerator, the way other families displayed their service members. The next time I visited, the refrigerator held a school lunch menu and a coupon for an oil change. The photographs were in a drawer. My mother had not thrown them out. She simply had not found them important enough to put up. That, I came to understand, was the most honest review of my career my family would ever offer. Not contempt, just a quiet, persistent failure to consider me worth the space. I told myself the space did not matter. I had a different family forming around me by then, the kind that gets stitched together in ready rooms and on flight lines, and they put my picture up. They knew what I was becoming. It would be years before my real family found out, and when they did, it would not be from me. When my younger brother was 12, his teeth came in crooked, and the orthodontist's estimate landed on my mother's kitchen table like a verdict. She could not cover it. She did not ask me to. She never asked. Asking would have meant acknowledging that I was the one with the means, and that was a sentence she could not bring herself to say out loud. So I did what I had trained myself to do. I noticed and I paid, and I said nothing. I called the orthodontist's office directly and arranged the whole thing. Jeremy got his braces. 2 years later, he had a straight, confident smile, the kind that would one day flash across a flight line at my expense. And my mother told her sisters that she had managed it on her own. I let her. I had learned long ago that if I waited for credit in that family, I would be waiting forever. So I stopped waiting and just paid. It was cheaper, in every way that mattered, than the argument would have been. That became the pattern of the next decade. I would notice a need before anyone named it, and I would quietly meet it, and the meeting of it would be folded into the family story as something that had simply worked out. New brakes on my mother's car, the winter the temperature dropped and her old ones started grinding. A check, unmentioned when the water heater failed. I was a Marine officer with no children and no mortgage, and I funneled a steady, silent stream of my pay back into a house where my name was rarely spoken with pride. When Jeremy turned 16, I bought him his first car. Nothing extravagant. A used sedan with good safety ratings and 80,000 miles on it, because the thought of my baby brother driving the back roads of our county in something unreliable kept me up at night. I had it delivered to the house with a bow on it, like in a commercial, because I wanted him to have one moment that felt like the moments other kids got. He called me that night, and for about 90 seconds, he was the boy I remembered, breathless and grateful, telling me it was the best thing anyone had ever done for him. I held the phone and closed my eyes and let myself have it. 90 seconds. A week later, my mother mentioned, in passing, that Jeremy had told his friends I bought the car because I felt guilty for leaving, as if the steady fact of my support was an apology I owed, as if every dollar were a confession. I did not correct him. I did not correct her. But something in me filed it away, the way you file the first small symptom of a thing that will later have a name. There was a holiday around then that I still think about. I had flown home, used leave I had been saving, rearranged a training schedule, called in a favor from a fellow officer to cover a duty I owed. I wanted to be there for the kind of ordinary family Thanksgiving I had spent my whole life enabling from a distance. I got there and spent most of the day in the kitchen because that was the role, and at dinner my mother went around the table and made each person say what they were thankful for. When it came to me, she answered for me before I could speak. She said she was thankful I had finally found time in my busy schedule to grace them with a visit. And she said it with a smile that took the edge off for everyone but me. The table laughed. Jeremy laughed. I laughed too because that is what you do. And I passed the potatoes I had peeled, and I understood that even my presence was something they experienced as a favor I was doing them, never the other way around. I flew back 2 days early. I told them a training requirement had come up. There was no training requirement. I just could not sit at that table, one more meal, being thanked for showing up to a house I was quietly keeping afloat. I was a major by the time the distance between who I was and who they thought I was became unbridgeable. I had commanded in the air. I had decorations in a shadow box that I never explained, because explaining them would have required telling stories I did not tell. And on the rare phone calls home, I would sometimes try, just a little, to let my mother see the edge of my real life. We did something significant last week, I told her once. I can't get into it. But I wanted you to know I'm doing work that matters. There was a pause on the line, the particular pause of a person waiting for you to finish so they can talk. That's nice, honey, she said. Anyway, your brother's been talking about enlisting. Now that's a Marine I can brag about, a boy serving his country. I was a field-grade officer who had been shot at over a foreign province while her son was deciding whether to finish community college, and in my mother's mouth, the word Marine belonged to him before he had ever raised his right hand. I said something supportive. I always said something supportive. Then I hung up and stood in my quarters in the quiet, and I understood, fully and without drama, that the family had assigned me a role I would never be permitted to outgrow. I was the provider. I was not the pride. Those were two different children in my mother's mind, and only one of them had ever needed a uniform to be worthy of the word. I should have seen the flight line coming. In a sense, I had been walking toward it my whole life. The call about the family day came from Jeremy himself, which was rare enough that I almost did not recognize his number. His squadron was returning from a deployment with a Marine Expeditionary Unit, and the air station was holding a homecoming and family day out on the flight line, with the aircraft on display and the families invited. He was a Lance Corporal now, an Aviation Ordnance Marine, 2 years into his enlistment, and full of the easy swagger of a young man who has found a place that finally makes him feel like somebody. You should come, he said, and then, because he could not help himself, if you can get the time off from whatever it is you do. Whatever it is you do. He was 23 years old, and he had no idea that what I did was the reason he could stand on a flight line at all. I let it go. I always let it go. But I told him I would come, and I meant it, because some stubborn part of me still believed that if I showed up enough times, eventually I would be seen. I made a decision driving down that morning that I have thought about many times since. I decided to keep a low profile. It was Jeremy's day, his squadron, his homecoming, his moment to be the somebody he had become. I did not want to arrive in a flight suit or pull rank or be anything other than a sister in the crowd. So I wore jeans and a plain jacket, and I left my CAC card and my rank and my whole career in the car, and I walked onto the air station as nothing more than family. I have replayed that choice, the choice to make myself small one more time, for people who had never once made room for me. I do not regret it exactly, but I understand now that I had spent so many years shrinking that I no longer noticed I was doing it. I thought I was being gracious. I was being invisible. There is a difference, and it took a stranger to teach it to me. The flight line was loud and bright and full of families. Children were climbing on static displays. Spouses were crying the good kind of tears. And there, in the middle of a knot of young Marines, was my brother, looking tan and lean and proud, with our mother beside him beaming up at him like he had personally won the war. I almost turned around. I want you to know that. I almost got back in my car. Some animal part of me knew what was coming, the way you know weather. But I had driven 2 hours, and he was my brother, and so I walked over. That was when Jeremy saw me and grinned and decided to make me the entertainment. "Hey guys," he called out to his squad, loud enough to turn heads. "This is my sister. She's like in the Marines too, supposedly." A couple of the young Marines chuckled, the obligatory laugh you give a buddy who is performing. My mother's smile widened. She loved it when Jeremy was the center of a room. "Come on, Dana," he went on, warming to it. "Tell them about your job. They give you a call sign and everything, right?" There it was. I felt the old reflex, the urge to shrink, to laugh it off, to let him have his moment at my expense the way I had let him have everything else. I opened my mouth to deflect. "No way they gave you a call sign," Jeremy said before I could answer, rolling his eyes for his audience. "She thinks she's a pilot. My sister, the fighter pilot." He laughed at his own joke, and his squad laughed with him, and my mother laughed too. A bright, easy laugh. The laugh of a woman who has never once considered that the daughter she is laughing at might be the most accomplished person on the entire flight line. I stood there in my civilian jacket and said nothing. I had a lifetime of practice saying nothing. And I want to be clear that I was not planning to say anything. I was planning to let it go, the way I always did, to absorb it and smile and find a soda and survive the afternoon. But then a man stepped out of the group, an older Marine, a sergeant by his collar, with the kind of calm that the young ones did not have yet. He had heard the laughter and come to see what was funny, the way a good squad leader does. He looked at me, friendly, with no idea what he was about to do. "All right, I'll bite," he said, easy and good-natured. "What's your call sign, ma'am?" The flight line did not go quiet then. The laughter was still going. Jeremy was still grinning. My mother was still glowing. The sergeant was smiling at me the way you smile at a buddy's civilian relative, expecting me to say I did not have one, expecting to be let in on the joke. I looked at him, and I made a different choice than the one I had been making my whole life. I did not shrink. I did not deflect. I just told the truth, quietly, the way you tell the truth when you have nothing left to prove and nothing left to lose. "Iron 10, I said. For a moment the words did not seem to land. Jeremy was still mid-laugh. And then I watched the color leave the sergeant's face, watched it drain out of him from the jaw up, the way blood leaves a face when the brain catches up to the ears. "Say that again," he said. His voice had changed. The easy good humor was gone, replaced by something careful and almost afraid. "Iron 10, I said again. What happened next happened fast. The sergeant came to attention so hard and so suddenly that his cover nearly came off his head. His heels cracked together. His chin came up. And then, in a voice that carried down the entire flight line, loud enough that the families and the children and the laughing young Marines all turned to look, he said the thing that broke my brother's whole world in half. "Iron 10 pulled my squad out of Sangin," he said, and his voice cracked on the word Sangin, and he did not care who heard it. 40 minutes of guns, danger close when we were pinned in a wadi and the bird that was supposed to cover us got recalled. I was a lance corporal in that squad, ma'am. I would be dead right now. Every one of us would be dead. I have told that story for 13 years, and I never knew your face." The flight line had gone silent. I could hear the wind. I could hear somewhere a child asking a parent what was happening. And I could see, out of the corner of my eye, my brother's grin sliding off his face like something physical, like something falling. My mother had gone white. She was looking at the sergeant, standing rigid at attention in front of her invisible daughter, and then she was looking at me, and I watched 20 years of a story she had told herself begin to come apart behind her eyes. I did not say anything clever. There was nothing clever to say. I had spent my whole life waiting to be seen by these two people, and instead I was being seen by a stranger in front of them on a flight line on a Tuesday afternoon. "At ease, Sergeant," I said quietly. "Please." He did not go to ease right away. He held the salute he had snapped up, and his eyes were wet, and he held it until I returned it, because he needed to, and I let him, because he had earned it. Around us, every Marine on that flight line who understood what they had just heard had come to attention too. The young ones in Jeremy's squad, who a moment ago had been laughing, were standing rigid, staring at me, recalibrating everything they thought they knew. Jeremy was not standing at attention. Jeremy was just staring at me, his mouth slightly open, the joke dead in his throat, looking at his sister like he had never seen her before in his life. In a way, he never had. I lowered my hand. The sergeant came to ease. And for one long, ringing moment, nobody on that flight line knew what to do, least of all the two people who had spent 20 years deciding I was nothing. I did the only thing I knew how to do. I tried to give the day back to my brother. "Sergeant," I said, keeping my voice level and warm. "I'm glad you made it home, truly. What's your name?" "Smith, ma'am," he said. "Jackson Smith." He was still half at attention, still unable to fully relax in front of me, and I could see him fighting the urge to tell me his whole life, to tell me about the men in that wadi, about the ones who came home and the ones who did not. "It's good to meet you, Sergeant Smith," I said. "You held that position long enough for me to do my job. That was on you, not me." He shook his head, slowly, like I had said something that did not compute. "Respectfully, ma'am, that's not how any of us remember it." I let him introduce me to the rest of them. He did it with a reverence that was almost painful to watch, walking me down the small line of young Marines, telling them in a low, steady voice who I was, what Iron 10 meant in the squadrons. The kind of pilot who would put a Viper between Marines on the ground and the people trying to kill them and not leave until the last man was clear. The young Marines shook my hand like I was made of something fragile and precious. One of them, a kid who could not have been more than 19, said, "It's an honor, ma'am," and meant it so completely that I had to look away. Jeremy hovered at the edge of it all. He did not come forward. He could not. The whole architecture of how he understood the world, who mattered and who did not, who was somebody and who was just his sister, had collapsed in the space of about 90 seconds, and he did not have anything to stand on. One of his buddies, a lance corporal named Reyes, finally said it out loud, because young Marines say everything out loud. "Riverdale," he said, half laughing, half stunned. "Why didn't you ever tell us your sister was Iron 10? Jeremy did not have an answer. I watched him try to find one and fail. The truth, of course, was that he had never told them, because he had never known. And he had never known because he had never once asked me a single real question about my life. He had spent 20 years too busy being the family's pride to be curious about its provider. Jeremy started, and then stopped. I didn't know it was. I didn't know it was a big deal. It was the most honest thing he had said in years, and it landed in the silence like a stone in a well. My mother found me by the cars about 20 minutes later. I had stepped away from the crowd to get some air, to let my heart rate come down, to be alone with the strange, hollow feeling of having finally been seen and discovering it did not fill the hole I thought it would. She came across the lot with her purse clutched in front of her like a shield, and I knew before she opened her mouth that there would be no apology. "Did you have to do that?" she said. Her voice was tight. "In front of his whole squad? On his day?" I looked at her for a long moment. The afternoon sun was on her face, and she looked older than I remembered, and angrier than the situation could possibly justify, and I finally understood what I was looking at. She was not asking me what I had done at Sangin. She was not asking what Iron 10 meant, or how close I had come, or what it had cost. She was asking why I had not stayed small. That was the only question my recognition had raised for her. Not pride, not curiosity, just the quiet alarm of a woman whose story had been threatened. "I didn't do anything, Mom," I said. "A man recognized my call sign, that's all." "You embarrassed your brother," she said. "He embarrassed himself," I said, and it came out gentler than it had any right to. I just stood there. She did not have a response to that. She turned and walked back toward the crowd, toward Jeremy, toward the version of the family she could still control. And I stood by the cars and watched her go, and I felt something I had not felt in 20 years of providing for people who could not see me. I felt finished. Not angry, just finished. I called Maddie that night from a parking lot off the interstate, halfway home, because I could not face my empty quarters yet. Maddie had been my wingman for 2 deployments. She was the one person alive who had been in the air the day Sangin happened, who knew what those 40 minutes had actually been, who did not need me to explain anything. They laughed at me, I told her. On the flight line, my own mother laughed. Maddie was quiet for a second. Then she said, "And then?" "And then a sergeant I've never met stood up and told them what I did," I said, and to my horror, my voice broke. "A stranger, Maddie, a complete stranger gave me the thing I've been waiting my whole life to get from them, and they were standing right there, and they couldn't." "Because they don't have it to give," Maddie said. She had always been able to cut to the bone in a sentence. "You've been going to a dry well for 30 years, Dana, hoping that this time there'd be water. There's never going to be water. That's not because you didn't ask right. It's because the well is dry." I sat in that parking lot for a long time after we hung up, watching the headlights go by on the interstate, thinking about wells. I had built my entire adult life around being the one who provided. I had told myself that providing was its own reward, that I did not need the thanks, that I had stopped waiting. But I had not stopped waiting. I had just gotten quieter about it. Every check, every quiet fix, every swallowed insult had been a coin dropped into a well I kept hoping would someday give water back. It was never going to. And the strangest part, the part I turned over and over in that parking lot, was that the recognition I had finally gotten had not come from the well at all. It had come from a man in a wadi 13 years ago, a man whose name I had not even known until that afternoon. The people I had risked my life for had seen me clearly. The people I had spent my life providing for never would. That was the night I decided to stop dropping coins. It is a quiet thing, deciding to stop. There was no scene, no announcement. I just drove home and slept. And in the morning, I made coffee and sat at my own kitchen table and did something I had never let myself do before. I added it up. Not to make myself a martyr, just to see the number clearly, the way you check fuel before a flight, because flying on what you assume instead of what you know is how people die. The braces, the car, the brakes, and the water heater in the steady stream of checks. Half of Jeremy's tuition before he dropped out. The down payment on the house my mother lived in. The house she told her sisters she had bought herself. I had been the silent engine of that family's stability for 15 years, and not one person in it could have told you so, because I had made certain they would never have to. I was not going to make certain anymore. Not out of spite, out of clarity. The next time my mother called, it was about money, the way it usually was, sideways and without quite asking. The property taxes were due. She mentioned it the way she always did, leaving a silence where the offer was supposed to go. I had filled that silence 100 times. I had trained her to expect that I would. This time, I did not fill it. "I'm not going to be able to help with that this year, Mom," I said. The silence changed character. "What do you mean you can't help? You're an officer. You make good money." "I make fine money," I said. "That's not the issue. The issue is that I've been quietly carrying this family for 15 years, and I've decided to stop doing it quietly, and I've decided to stop doing it at all for a while. I love you, but I'm not going to keep paying for a seat at a table where I'm the family joke." "After everything this family has done for you," she said, and there it was, the line I had been waiting for my whole life without knowing it. I waited. I genuinely waited, the phone warm against my ear, for her to name one thing. One single thing the family had done for me. The silence stretched, and in it I finally heard the truth that Maddie had handed me in the parking lot. There was no list. There had never been a list. The well was dry. "Tell me one thing," I said, not unkindly. "Just one." She hung up. The pressure campaign started within the week, the way it always does in families like mine. An aunt called to tell me I was being cold. A cousin texted that my mother was beside herself, worried sick. Jeremy was deputized to talk sense into me, and he called, and for the first few minutes he tried to be the messenger they had sent him to be, repeating phrases that were clearly not his own, about family and gratitude, and not abandoning your mother. I let him run out of script. Then I said, "Jeremy, do you know who bought your car?" There was a silence on the line. "Mom did," he said. But he said it like a question. "No," I said. "I did. I bought your car. I paid for your braces. I paid for half of your first year of college. I have been sending money home since before you were old enough to spell my name. I never told you because I didn't want you to feel like you owed me. But I'm not going to let you stand there and tell me I abandoned this family. I have never once abandoned this family. I have only ever held it up." He did not say anything for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was small, younger than 23. "I didn't know that." "I know you didn't," I said. "That's the whole point." I did not hear from him again for almost a month. I would learn later what filled that month, and it was not what I expected. It was Sergeant Jackson Smith. I did not orchestrate it. I did not even know it was happening. But Smith, it turned out, was Jeremy's section leader, the non-commissioned officer, directly over my brother in the ordnance shop, and Smith had not been able to let the flight line go any more than I had. A few days after the family day, he pulled Jeremy aside during a slow afternoon and told him the whole thing. Not the cleaned-up version, the real one. He told Jeremy about the wadi outside Sangan, about the patrol that went wrong, the squad pinned down in a dry riverbed, with effective fire coming from two sides and a third element trying to flank. About the helicopter that was supposed to be their cover getting pulled to a higher priority emergency, leaving them alone. About the long, terrible minutes when they all understood, in the wordless way men understand these things, that they were probably going to die in that wadi. And then about the Viper that came in, low and fast and stayed. The pilot who put her aircraft between them and the guns and ran pass after pass. Danger close, close enough that the rounds were landing inside the margin, where the manuals say you do not shoot because you might hit your own people. 40 minutes. Smith told Jeremy that the pilot had been told to leave, that she was running low on fuel and ammunition, and that she had stayed anyway, because leaving meant the squad died, and she had made a different call. He told Jeremy that the call sign that came over the radio that day, the voice that told them to keep their heads down because help was not leaving, was Iron 10. "I have carried that day for 13 years, Smith told my brother. "I have a daughter because that pilot stayed. I named her after my squad leader who didn't make it home from a different day, but I get to have a daughter at all because of Iron 10. And you stood on that flight line and laughed at her. You laughed at the person the rest of us would have followed into hell." Jeremy told me later that he did not say anything. There was nothing to say. He went back to his work and his hands were shaking and he could not figure out why his eyes kept stinging. Smith was not cruel about it, Jeremy said, and that was almost the worst part. A cruel man would have been easy to dismiss. Smith was quiet and matter-of-fact, the way men who have actually seen the worst of things tend to be. And he did not deliver it as a lecture. He delivered it as a debt being named. He told Jeremy that there's a particular kind of person the rest of a unit measures itself against, the one whose name you say when you want to describe what courage actually looks like when it stops being a word and starts being a decision, and that for an entire generation of Marines who had been on the ground in that province, that name was Iron 10. He told Jeremy that pilots like that were rarer than people understood, that most would have taken the order to withdraw and lived with it, because the order was lawful and the math was bad and nobody would have blamed them. He told Jeremy that the difference between most and her was an entire squad of Marines who came home instead of dying in a ditch, and that my brother had been raised by one of those rare ones and had spent his whole life thinking she was the boring one in the family. While that was happening to my brother, something else was happening at my mother's house, something quieter and more ordinary, and in its own way, just as instructive. The machine that had run on my invisible labor for 15 years started to grind without its lubricant. The property taxes came due, and there was no quiet check to cover them. The car my mother drove, the one I had kept in brakes and tires and oil changes for a decade, started making a noise, and there was no one to call about it. None of it was catastrophic. People manage, my mother managed. But she managed by finally, for the first time, having to see the size of the thing I had been carrying, because the only way to understand the weight of something is to pick it up yourself. I heard, through the aunt who had called to scold me, that my mother had said to someone in a moment of frustration, "I didn't realize Dana was doing all of that." As if it were a surprise. As if the surprise were not itself the entire problem. I did not gloat about any of it. I want to be honest about that because the temptation was there, and I felt it, and I did not act on it, and I am a little proud of that. I did not call to point out what they had lost. I did not need to. The clarity was doing its own work, in its own time in both houses. My mother was learning what I had carried, my brother was learning who I was, and I, for the first time in 20 years, was learning what it felt like to wake up in the morning and not owe anyone an explanation for my own existence. I was, in a word, fine. Better than fine. The boundary I had set was not a wall I was huddling behind. It was a door I had finally closed, and the closing of it let in air I had not known I was missing. I flew. I did my job, the job I loved, the job that had given me a name that meant something to the only people whose opinion had ever actually been earned. I went to work, and I was good at it, and I came home, and the silence in my quarters was not lonely anymore. It was just quiet. There is an enormous difference, and it took me 38 years to learn it. I started doing small things for myself that I had never made room for. I planted herbs in a window box badly and kept most of them alive. I took a Saturday and drove to the coast for no reason at all and sat on the sand and watched the water and did not check my phone. For most of my adult life, a free Saturday had been a problem to solve, an opening into which some family need would inevitably pour, and I had trained myself to keep it filled before anyone could fill it for me. Now the Saturday was just mine. I kept waiting for the guilt to arrive, the old reflex that told me rest was something I had to earn by first taking care of everyone else. It came the first few times, and then it came less. And then one weekend it did not come at all, and I noticed its absence the way you notice a headache lifting, by the sudden strange lightness of its being gone. I had spent so long believing that my worth was measured by what I carried, that setting the weight down felt, at first, like I was getting away with something. It took a while to understand that I was not getting away with anything. I was just living the way people are supposed to live, the way I had made it possible for everyone around me to live, while forgetting to do it myself. Jeremy reached out first. I expected it to be my mother, eventually, driven by need, if not by love. But it was Jeremy, and the way he did it told me everything about how much he had changed. He did not call to apologize at first. He was not ready for that, and some wise instinct told him not to fake it. Instead, he texted me a photograph. It was a picture of the static display from the family day, a Viper attack helicopter sitting on the flight line in the afternoon sun. The kind of aircraft I had flown over Sangin, lean and ugly and beautiful, all at once. Underneath it, he had written, "Is this the kind you flew?" It was the first time in his life my brother had ever asked me a question and actually wanted the answer. It was such a small thing. A question. The first real question he had ever asked me about my life. I sat looking at it for a long time, and then I wrote back. Close. Mine was the older model, but yes, that family. "It's beautiful," he wrote. "It is," I wrote back. And then, because I am still her sister, even when I am being careful, I added, "It's also loud and uncomfortable, and tries to kill you in 100 small ways every single flight. But yes, it's beautiful." He sent back a laughing emoji, and then, a minute later, "Can we talk sometime, for real?" We met 2 weeks later at a diner halfway between us, neutral ground, a booth by the window. He looked older than the last time, or maybe just less certain, which on a young man can look like the same thing. We ordered coffee and talked about nothing for a while, the weather, his squadron, a movie. And then he set his cup down and looked at me and asked the question that Smith had lit in him. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" he said. "About Sangin, about any of it. I'm your brother. Why did I have to find out from my section leader on a flight line?" I had thought about how I would answer this. I had thought about it a great deal. "Because I didn't want you to love me for what I did," I said. "I wanted you to love me because I'm your sister. If I'd come home with the stories, with the medals, with all of it laid out, I'd never have known which one you were responding to, the hero or the family member, so I kept the hero out of the house. I just wanted to be Dana." I turned my coffee cup a quarter turn on the table. "I think I made a mistake. I think I kept so much of myself out of the house that there was almost nothing left for you to see, and then I got angry that you couldn't see it. That wasn't fair to you. You can't recognize something you were never shown." He was quiet, working it over. "Smith says you're the best pilot in the wing," he said finally. "Smith is generous," I said. "Smith says you stayed when they told you to leave, that you would have died too if it had gone wrong, that you knew that and you stayed anyway." He was looking at the table now. "I told my whole squad you thought you were a pilot, like it was funny." "I know," I said. "I'm sorry," he said, and this time it was real. I could hear that it was real, stripped of the family script, just a young man who had gotten something badly wrong and knew it. "I'm really sorry, Dana, not just for the flight line, for all of it, for never asking." for letting Mom decide who you were and just going along with it because it was easier. I let it sit there. I did not rush to make him feel better, the way I would have a year before. He needed to feel the weight of it, and I needed to let him. "Thank you," I said. "I'm not going to pretend it didn't hurt because it did, for a very long time. But I believe you, and I'd like to know you. The real you, not the family's version of you. I think we both got assigned parts a long time ago, and I think we're both allowed to quit them now." We talked for 3 hours. The waitress refilled our coffee until she stopped asking. He told me about the deployment, the real version, the boredom and the fear, and the moment he had felt, for the first time, like he belonged to something. I told him about flight school, about the first time I ever brought a Viper around in a hard banking turn, and understood that this was what I was made for. We talked like two people who happened to be related and were meeting each other for the first time, which, in the only way that counts, we were. I made one thing clear before we left, because clarity is the only currency I trust anymore. "I'm glad we're doing this," I told him. "But I need you to understand that things aren't going back to the way they were. I'm not the family bank anymore, and if we have a relationship, it's because we actually want one, not because I'm paying for it. I'll be your sister for the rest of my life. I won't be your ATM ever again." "I don't want your money, Dana," he said, and the wounded honesty in it told me he meant it. "I want my sister. I think I've wanted her for a long time, and I just didn't know how to say it." Our mother was a harder story, and I want to be honest about that too, because the world is full of tidy endings, and this was not entirely one. Lorraine did not come around the way Jeremy did. She was older and more set, and her story about herself was load-bearing in a way that Jeremy's was not. To admit that she had spent 20 years failing to see her own daughter would have required dismantling something she did not have the tools to dismantle. So she did not all at once, not cleanly. But the world has a way of reading a citation aloud, whether you are ready to hear it or not. A few months after the diner, my squadron held a function, a change of command, the kind of formal evening where the history of a unit gets spoken into a microphone. As part of it, a senior officer read a short account of the squadron's notable actions, and among them, because enough time had passed that it could be said in a room, was the Sangin mission. The officer read the substance of my Distinguished Flying Cross citation. Helmand Province. The year, 2013. A flight of one pilot who, with her aircraft low on fuel and ordnance and under orders to withdraw, elected to remain on station for 40 minutes of continuous danger close fire in support of a pinned infantry squad, directly enabling the extraction of all personnel without loss of life. Jeremy was there. I had invited him, and he had come in a coat and tie, sitting very straight in a folding chair. I watched his face while the citation was read. I watched him hear, in the dry, formal language of the Marine Corps, the thing his section leader had told him in the ordnance shop. He did not cry, exactly, but he sat there with his jaw set and his eyes bright, and when it was over and the room applauded, he was the first one on his feet, and he stayed on his feet a beat longer than anyone else, like he was making up for a flight line. Sergeant Smith came to that function too. I had made sure he was invited, and he brought two of the others, two men from the Sangin squad, older now, one of them with a cane, and after the formal part was over, they found me, and we stood in a corner with drinks we were not really drinking, and they told me about their kids and their jobs and the lives they had gotten to live. The man with the cane had a son in college. The other one had just become a grandfather. Iron 10, I realized, standing there, was not a story about me at all. It was a story about all the ordinary Tuesdays these men had gotten to have because of 40 minutes over a wadi. The call sign was mine, but the lives were theirs, and they had built something real out of the time I had bought them, and that was worth more than every check I had ever dropped into a dry well. The man with the cane took my hand at the end of the night and held it longer than a handshake. He told me he had not been able to talk about that day for almost 10 years, that he had carried it around like a stone in his chest, and that it was only when his own daughter asked him why he sometimes went quiet that he had started to tell the story out loud. He said that for a decade the story had ended with the helicopter and the noise and the long ride out, and that it had never once had a face attached to it, just a voice on the radio and a call sign. He said that meeting me had finally let him finish the sentence. He could tell his daughter now that the woman who saved her father was real, that she had a name, that she had stood in a room and shaken his hand. I did not know what to say to that. I am not sure there is a right thing to say. So I just held his hand back and told him I was glad, which was true, and which was somehow enough. Jeremy was standing a few feet away, listening, and I saw on his face that he was finally understanding the actual size of the thing he had laughed at on a flight line, and that the understanding was going to live in him for a long time. Which it should. Jeremy started to change in the squadron, too, in ways that got back to me, through Smith. He stopped being so concerned with being seen, and started being concerned with being useful. He volunteered for the jobs nobody wanted. He started mentoring the boots coming in below him. Smith told me, with something like pride, that my brother was turning into a real Marine, the kind who does the work because the work matters and not because anyone is watching. He was taking after someone, Smith said, and we both knew who. My mother and I reached a kind of peace, eventually, though it was not the kind that comes with a tearful apology and a clean slate. It was quieter and more partial than that. She called one evening, months later, and we talked about small things, and at the end of the call, in a rush, like she had been working up to it the whole time, she said, "I saw the thing they read. About what you did. Jeremy showed me." There was a pause. "I didn't know, Dana." "I know you didn't," I said. "I should have," she said. And then she could not seem to go any further, and so I let her stop there. It was not everything. It was not the apology I had imagined at 16, lying awake with a baby breathing in the next room. But it was something, an honest sentence from a woman who did not have many of them in her, and I had learned by then to take the water where it actually came from and stop demanding it from places that had none. I do not know, even now, whether my mother fully came around or just ran out of audience for the old story. Some people do the work and change. Some people simply lose the room they were performing for. I stopped needing to know which one she was. That was its own kind of freedom, maybe the biggest one. I did not have to assign her a verdict. I could just let her be a person, complicated and limited and mine, and love her the amount that was safe to love her, and put my energy into the people who had shown me they could hold it. The last thing I want to tell you happened on the flight line, which feels right because that is where the story turned. It was early morning, the good light, the kind of cool, clear morning when the aircraft sit on the line like they are sleeping. Jeremy had asked if he could show me his shop, his real day-to-day, the work he did with his hands. And as we walked the line, a brand new boot came by, a kid fresh from his training, all sharp edges and nerves, and Jeremy stopped him. "Hey," Jeremy said to the kid and put a hand on my shoulder. "I want you to meet somebody. This is my sister, Major Riverdale. Call sign Iron 10, best pilot in the wing." He said it plainly, no joke in it, no edge, just fact, and then he added the part that undid me a little, standing there in the morning light. "I should have led with that my whole life. I'm just now learning to." The boot's eyes went wide. He said it was an honor, ma'am, the way they do, and he meant it the way they mean it. And I shook his hand and told him to take care of my brother, and I watched Jeremy walk the kid down the line, already explaining something, already teaching, already useful. I stood there in the early light by myself for a minute. Behind me, somewhere down the flight line, a Viper began to spin up. That low building whine I would know in my sleep, the sound of the thing I was made for. And I realized that I was not waiting for anything. For the first time in my entire life, I was not standing in a room waiting to be seen, not dropping a coin in a well and listening for the splash. I had been seen. I had seen myself. And the people who could love me were loving me, and the people who could not were no longer my responsibility to convince. Recognition is a nice thing. I will not pretend it is not. The day a stranger snapped to attention on a flight line and said my call sign out loud, something in me that had been clenched for 30 years finally let go. But that is not the day I think about now. The day I think about now is the morning after, when I sat at my own table and decided to stop paying for a love that was never going to be sold to me, and started living for the love that was already, quietly, mine. If you have ever been the one who holds everything up, the one nobody thanks because nobody even sees the weight, I want you to hear this from someone who carried it for a very long time. You are allowed to set it down. The people who only valued you for what you carried will be upset when you do. Let them be upset. The ones who love you will still be standing there when your hands are empty. Those are the only ones who were ever really yours. Recognition is nice. But the day I stopped needing it from the people who never gave it, that is the day I finally felt like I had come home. Thank you for staying with me to the end of this one. It took me almost 40 years to learn that I was allowed to set the weight down, and I still think about that flight line and the stranger who gave me the recognition my own family couldn't. I'd love to hear from you. Were you ever the one who held everything together while no one noticed, the one who paid quietly and never got the credit? Did you ever get the moment where someone finally saw you, and did it come from where you expected? And if you've ever had to decide whether to keep funding a love that was never really offered back, how did you find your way to letting go? Drop it in the comments, I read them, and if this story meant something to you, hit subscribe and stay a while.